Well, we're continuing with the Citizenship series, voting in politics. Last week we did mainly talked about voting, and I know a lot of you weren't here, but I don't really want to go over everything. I just want to bring a couple things out that I think were important for us to bring into today as we're going to look at politics more. Last week we were stressing the importance of prayer, which sounds like a no-brainer for a Christian, but it was a little bit different the way I was stressing the importance of prayer, because I got to believe that all of us in this room who will vote are going to vote according to the will of God, not according to our wills, but according to the will of God. And so prayer becomes huge. I mean, how do you know the will of God if you don't pray? And prayer is a big word and everything, but we were stressing the importance of prayer, that we would know His will, and we looked at voting and prayer kind of like together, that obviously prayer is a matter of our free will. We make a choice to pray. If we're not praying, it's because we decided not to pray. And when we do, we actively say, I'm going to pray about this. It's a choice. It's a matter of the will. And voting falls into the same kind of thing, that it's a choice that we've been given, and we get to choose who or what candidate, platform, whatever. But we can get really distracted by that. And probably all of us in this room have been, to be honest with you. Because it's much easier, like we were saying last week, when Peter talks about being entangled, and Paul talks about being entangled in the affairs of this world. It just doesn't take long. Once you watch television and you keep watching all these programs, you don't even realize it, but you've been seduced. You've taken on board all this stuff. You're thinking the way the world wants you to think. All of a sudden you're fighting with people, which is what the enemy wants. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in this whole arena. So what we were talking about last week, one of the keys was we don't really vote. We shouldn't be anyway, for particular results and outcomes. We're voting His will. We're the only people on the planet that are going to do that are going to pray and make a determination that, Lord, I trust You no matter what the outcome. Now that's not to say we put our head in the sand, but it is to say, if we get caught up and entangled in the affairs of this world and in the flesh and everything, we will find ourselves making choices, whether it be voting for candidates or just choices that we make on a daily basis, that are not really in accordance with His will. It's our will. I'm going to cite a couple things from the article. I didn't read the whole article last week either, because it's a very long article in Christianity Today. What was the name of it? Something to do with Trump. Speak Truth to Trump was the name of the article. So if you wanted to read the whole article, Christianity Today, Speak Truth to Trump. But it was a long article, but there was a couple things he said that I thought was pretty interesting that I cited last week. He says there's a point at which strategy becomes its own form of idolatry, an attempt to manipulate the levers of history in favor of the causes we support. Strategy becomes idolatry when we make alliances with those who seem to offer strength at the expense of our dependence on God. That's a powerful statement. That's a real powerful statement when we start to determine where our trust and our strength really lies. And when we start looking to candidates, people, like, well, if this one gets elected, if that one gets elected, it's a very, very thin line between strategizing and thinking that, well, this is what he says, strategy becomes idolatry when we betray our deepest values in pursuit of earthly influence. In other words, our dependency is definitely falling away from God and falling on a person, falling on a party. And we really believe that that's the way to go. I mean, that's who's going to save us. Now, all of us in the room would say, there's no way I would ever think that. I don't know. I don't know how far we can get sold into a person until we really start losing sleep. Or what if so-and-so gets elected? Well, so what if they do? Either God's on the throne or He's not. And my trust is in Him. Now that doesn't give me license to make stupid choices. But it does give me the opportunity to say, no matter what, God is still on the throne and I trust Him. And my trust is in Him. And I've prayed. God has led me, who or what, how to vote, whatever. And I get on with that thing. And after that, I walk away. This is God's world. Another thing he says, which is really very thought-provoking, was enthusiasm for a candidate like Trump gives our neighbors ample reason to doubt that we believe Jesus is Lord. They see that some of us are so self-interested and so self-protective that we will ally ourselves with someone who violates all that is sacred to us and hope that his rule will save us. Now, he was kind of Trump bashing in his article, but it doesn't really matter. That's not the issue. The issue, and we got to get, see, right now when we get like, well, I'm going to, that's perfect proof of what he is saying, that we can't take on somebody else and see that any time, no matter who it is, it could be Hillary, it could be Trump, it could be elections 4 years from now. Once we start getting way down the road in personality and platforms to the point where, we get like this, something's wrong.
What?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
What upsets me about that isn't that I am all in for Trump, but that's not the issue. The issue is things. He's saying things he stands for are against our principles or what we know is right. But when we go to the voting booth, there's not a checklist of principles. There's two people, and they both violate.
So why go to the voting booth?
Because.
To vote for somebody who goes against the things that we believe in.
But I don't.
No, but what I'm
That's
saying,
the case, and
by the way,
absolutely, he's saying that.
well, the thing is, last week I did a whole thing on this, so you're just catching part of it. I'm just trying to bring us back to the importance of prayer. That's really the bottom line, is the importance of prayer. And our heads and our hearts will be on straight when we pray. That's all there is to it. Whether God says, don't vote, whether God says vote for this one or that. We talked about these things last week. The point being, I do think all of us have to really, really think about the candidate, that we're voting for, the issues, the platform, and all that. If we vote, that his arguments are just in that they challenge what are we thinking, and are we aligning ourselves and giving our endorsement towards somebody or something that God surely doesn't. That becomes challenging to me, and doesn't have to be for you guys. It might be very clear for everybody. But we talked about that last week. I said the Bible, like I said originally, we're going to use that as a textbook, that the Bible, really you could look at it as a book of choices. I mean, choices that people have made from the very beginning through our generation now, a record of choices, an exercise of the free will. We looked at Moses quickly, who said choose life. That's a good choice, to choose life. I got away from the what would Jesus do to what did Jesus do? What is the example he gave us in his relationship with government and the choices that he had to make? Whether it came, paying taxes, he was like, I really don't need to pay taxes. I own the place. Why would I pay taxes on my world? It's mine. But I understand the nature of my relationship with civil government, and taxes are due, and I'm not going to offend them. We've got a lot to learn about these kinds of things. I'm not going to offend government. So we'll pay him taxes. Go fishing, you find a coin in his mouth, that whole kind of thing. Should we pay taxes to Caesar? He takes the coin. Whose image is on this? They say Caesar, well then give to Caesar, give him his coins back. His image is, you give to God what is God's. In other words, you were made in his image and likeness. So let's make sure we understand our dual citizenship between heaven and earth and the whole thing. And so we were looking at that. We talked about, Joshua said, which side of the river? We always choose you this day who you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And he gave them choices. And I think this is huge in our election. This is me personally. Because he makes the comment, basically he's saying, do you remember what it was like on the other side of the river? Do you remember what it was like to have worldly and earthly values? To be letting the lusts of the flesh, to get, he says, go ahead, vote according to that if you want. You can do that. Or you can choose to serve the Lord in what he's saying. You have to make a choice. Which side of the river are you living on? Which side of the river is important to you? These are all things that go into our choices. We know that by the time we get to 1 Samuel, and they're saying we want to be like the other nations. We don't want a theocracy. We want to be like the other nations. We want our value system. We want our ways of life. I want this, I want that, 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 I want this, I want that. And it gets to a point where it's like, what does God want? What does God want? Now I think, I wrote down some challenging questions because I've got them to myself as much as all of us here, in terms of, have I spent as much time considering what God wants? And I'm not talking about going to the Bible and finding it. I'm talking about in prayer, as watching the television and the various, how much time how much time and how much is going on in me that is what God has said, or what CNN or Fox or one of the news stations or whatever? I think those are challenging questions, because I have a hard time sitting here and saying, well, I have spent more time in prayer than watching television and getting my information from articles and from this and that. These are challenging questions for all of us. I'm not challenging anybody's prayer life or anything like that. I don't think that's my position to do that. It's a work of the Spirit that has to say to us, you know what? You have got, this last week you spent 20 hours watching television. That's okay, whether you spend 20 hours watching television. This is the Lord is the only one that could say, and you gave me like 25 minutes. And you think you're going to make a godly decision? It's a bit like that I think this is the challenge for the church. I'm not talking about every American, because I don't see us as Americans. I see us as a holy nation, because that's what God said. You're a holy people. You're holy unto me. You belong to me. You are the only people on the planet that will pray for my will to be done, that will work with me in seeing the kingdom come to earth as it is. You are the only ones. You are the ones that have the mind of the Lord. You are the ones that the Spirit of God speaks to. You are the ones that have the Spirit of grace and truth inside you, speaking to you, working through you. You are the ones. It's huge for Christians. This election, to me, when I hear things like I sit there, part of me cries and the other part of me gets angry when I hear about certain, denominations and who they're going to back and why they're going to do it. I find it very challenging. I'm not speaking to the world. I said last week I'm speaking, to the church. So today, with all the stuff that we said last week, and by the way, I see when they said we want to be like the other nations, I see that as humanity, not just Israel, not just God's people, but humanity rejecting God's ways, God's government, which is what we've been talking about. It's really rejecting God, getting entangled in the affairs of this world, getting entangled as flesh speaks to flesh. And I guarantee you, what we have been hearing, whether you're watching the debates or not, that is not spirit. If nothing else, if you've been watching them, let me take that back. It's not the Holy Spirit. Oh, there's a spirit coming through loud and clear. But it is not the Spirit of God. It's the spirit of man, and there's been the flesh barking and barking and barking. When I hear things like the most important question that could be asked tonight, and I don't want to get off of it, but when I hear things like the most important question that needs to be answered tonight is, Donald Trump, do you believe that the email hacking has come from the Russians? When I hear somebody who's going for president of this country, and I look around and I see the racial tension, I see the poverty, I see a healthcare system that's a wreck. I can go on and on, at least 6 or 7 more huge issues that this country is facing. And one of the candidates says the most important question is a political one. I've got to find a way of bringing this guy down. We're in trouble. If that is the most important question of the evening, we're in trouble. Because I think that there's single parents, all kinds of people that are suffering. And I think the most important question of the evening is, how on earth are we going to be able to help each other through very perilous times? We're in rough times. And there's got to be a way through. And it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, male, female, it doesn't matter what you are. And a trick of politics, and we're going into politics, is to do that, to divide, to make sure you understand that there are divisions. That's what politics does. It's one of the things it does. Now, before I get into this politics part, I've done my little bit from last week, but anything that anybody wants to throw out, maybe something from last week that struck you, or that doesn't matter, just anything?
Well, I think the intent of his article was not on voting at all, right?
I don't know.
I mean, it was more to draw into question how the general church makes decisions on things, not necessarily to
Mhm.
support or not support a candidate that supports a platform of greater evangelical Christians.
Yeah, I would agree with you that he wasn't, although the article had a feeling of Trump bashing, I think he kind of made it clear at the same time he went down that road. He just chose one of the candidates. It wasn't, you could easily, in fact, I think in the first paragraph he said something along the lines of, I got this impression, his comments on the Democratic platform, the Democrats, is obvious how ungodly they are. And their choice, their candidate's choice, it's easy to see how ungodly they are. He kind of...
Well, he almost had to go down that path against Trump, though.
Yeah.
Because that's the greater support. Just like Dutch Sheets had to go down and kind of correct, in a way, this week, the greater charismatic movement who are doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was more of an article on correction of the body, not necessarily correction against Trump or anything else.
Yeah.
When I'm listening to them speak, I mean, I don't know, it's just something going on in my spirit. It's clear. I don't know, I just, like, if you want to go judging a person by each thing they've said, I wouldn't stand up to it. I don't know if anybody here would, but, you know, if you're going to look at that, or is this a godly person, he did this 6 years ago, or whatever, I don't think you can go with that. I think you just got to go in your heart. What's their intent? Where are they going to be open to hearing from God? Are they care about God, or do they not? Do they care about the country they're going to represent and the people they're going to represent, or do they just care about their own political situation? What's their motivation? Who are they? What are they? Where do they stand? And it's a spiritual thing. There's a lot of things disturbing, including, I think that article you read got way out of line to say that, and I think, but yeah, I think there's more. You got to listen to what's behind the words, especially when you got moderators that are slanted, and the questions they think are the most important is what gets brought up. But
I think the whole thing becomes, very challenging, like you're saying, is what we're hearing, what we are receiving.
what are you hearing with just your natural ears, or are you hearing in the spirit?
But I think that is very challenging, because I don't know how you hear in the spirit without being in the spirit. And I don't know how you be in the spirit without a praying relationship with God that's more than just, coming to the well, but an ongoing, a real, and I'm not saying you have to go into a prayer club. Prayer is huge, it's a huge subject, but an ongoing relationship with God that is steering and guiding us every step of the way that way. That's kind of where I'm coming from. Everybody's going to make their choices. Again, voting, like we said last week, it is an exercise of the will. We will make choices, whether we vote, whether we don't. Why? And hopefully it's all in conjunction with the leading of the Spirit. And everybody's going to have to, like we make all of our choices. They're laid before God, our choices,
I mean, you still can make the choice, but the thing is, whether you vote or not vote, you're still voting. If you don't vote, you're changing the balance of the votes, just as much as if you vote.
So it comes down to this exercise of free will and choice, the choices that we're making. And it's not easy or simple, like I said last week. It's not easy or simple. Now, getting into the politics end of it, I'm going to kind of say a few things, and I want you to kind of hang with me and listen, and then we'll comment afterwards, because I want to get through a certain section of this, and then we can, do whatever. The etymology, the origin of the word politics goes back to, you okay?
Sorry, his battery was dying.
Yeah, goes back to ancient Greece and everything, and the actual word means of, for, or relating to citizens, which is a way of saying citizens representing citizens for citizens. That's how it got birthed back in ancient Greece, that they recognized that citizens are the ones who should represent citizens for the sake of citizens. It's kind of simple when you think about it, but when we look at politics and political structures now, it is not that at all. We don't see average citizens, if you would. Technically citizens, if you're American, you're a citizen, but when you can only get into the presidential race if you've got millions and millions, you're very, very rich. We've already moved, we're going to see, we've moved very, very far away from the nature itself of politics, which makes it kind of interesting. If we have any awareness at all, we kind of know that the enemy has gotten into everything that could be used for good, and that was perhaps even developed initially for good. And it's the oldest story in the book, isn't it? We can go back to the 3rd chapter and see the way a beautiful, wonderful place for the welfare of mankind is immediately corrupted. Doesn't take them long. So that's the etymology of it. The definition in the dictionary now, this is a modern day definition, politics, activities, that's an important word, activities that relate to influencing the actions and policies of a government, or getting and keeping power in a government. I'll read it one more time. The actual activities themselves, politics, think of the activities that have been going on the last couple of years for this particular election. The activities that relate to influencing the actions and policies of a government, or getting and keeping power in a government.
Wow.
That's a frightening definition to me. That's kind of scary. A dictionary's got nothing to gain from writing something political. They're writing definitions. This is the definition. It is so far removed from the original intent of Aristotle and the ancient Greeks, who saw the virtue and value of people coming together like this, making determinations together, how we would live together for the benefit of all of us, citizens, helping citizens, for the sake of citizens that are citizens, Very, very different. To the point where politics became a science. We've heard, you can go to school for political science. You'll recognize the name. I haven't read a lot of his stuff, and I never will. Machiavelli, he's considered the father of modern science, and we know, modern political science, and we know that his philosophy was the ends justify the means, which, if nothing else, we're seeing right now played out. This is back in the 1500s.
So is that when it changed? Is that when it shifted?
No, not necessarily, exactly, but we can trace back modern politics. Modern meaning what we're going to look at in the Bible is not modern, which goes back to, you can already see the distortion of politics as you look at the Bible, and now we look at it now because the Bible, the last stories that are written are a couple thousand years old. So what's happened in the last couple thousand years? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that later too, that not a lot, but politics has gotten extremely perverted to the point where we don't even know, in this room, we wouldn't be able to relate to the original intent or the way politics was originally developed and the way people understood politics to be. I guarantee you, if you brought one of the brothers or sisters from thousands of years ago to 21st century America and they were watching what's going on, they'd say, that's not politics. That is not politics. That is something else, but it is not politics, because this is what politics is. I suppose we could do that with most anything. If they saw the stuff that we eat, the way we eat it, and everything else, they might say, that's not food anymore. Genetically modified, I don't know what that is. Anyway, So Machiavelli is considered the father of modern science. He didn't have a good philosophy that the ends justify the means. This guy Fisher Ames is a guy that was a congressman right after the Declaration of Independence, when America became its own, country and everything. Fisher Ames, this is a comment, this is a quote from him. Politics is the science of good sense applied to public affairs, and those public affairs are forever changing. I can see that, okay. So you've got to be willing to change depending on what the issues are. There has to be a dimension of change. But this is interesting. He says politics is the science of good sense. Then he goes on to say, politics is not a science. It's not, what? Wait a minute. Well, is it or isn't it? Politics is not a science as much as a business. It cannot have fixed principles. Now this is around the birth of our country. And I'm just reading this because if you start from his point of view, and this was a guy that was for big government and the whole thing, if you start from him and you hear what he's saying, that politics is not a science as much as a business, it cannot have fixed principles from which a wise man, would never swerve because of the fickleness and, the interests, the foolishness of men's tempers. So what he's really saying is that, science, politics is not a science, politics is a business. But when you come up with a statement that cannot have fixed principles.
But is he saying that that's right, that politics is how the government should be run?
That's basic.
Is he saying we got to keep politics out?
No, he is saying that politics cannot have fixed principles. Immediately when you say that, that's like anything else. Parents in this room who have had kids, employees, employers, whoever you are, whatever you've done, when you say something like you can't have fixed principles, you're done. You're finished. It's all over. That is the original thing from the enemy. Has God really said that,
Right, but that's very different than, the founding fathers,
He is one of the founding fathers. And that's when it makes it so interesting. Like what you just said.
Federalist Papers.
This is at the same exact time with the same exact group of people. He was a congressman. Like I said, the enemy, if we don't think that the enemy has been playing around with politics since the very beginning, we're going to look at Genesis 3 again this morning. We looked at it last week. We'll look at it quickly again this morning. Those are little subtle statements that are being made that we go, oh yeah, I can see that. Times are changing, so you got to change. You can't really hold on to anything. Mm-hmm. So if you have to lie, if you have to cheat, if you have to kill somebody along, these are kinds of, this is what happens. The ends justify the means. This is the nature of the politics as they exist now, not originally. And that becomes important for us. I made a statement a couple weeks ago, I hate politics, and I have to take that back online. Actually, I don't hate politics. I hate the politics that we call politics and that is politics now, and the tools that they use that have been in our face constantly. It's not just the last 2 years with this election. We've seen it in our entire lives. Mm-hmm. We're old enough in this room to go back a few decades. The last guy that I'm quoting here is this Peter Edelman, who's alive now. He is a professor of constitutional law at Georgetown. And he made a statement that I think helps all of us. He said money and what he calls meanness, being mean. Money and meanness have corrupted politics. So he's a guy that recognizes what has happened to this original thing that we call politics. And he's a professor of constitutional law at Georgetown. He's like 78 years old, so he's been around a while. He's served under different administrations. He has an illustrious career. He's quite a guy. And he very simply sees the problems. What has perverted politics is money. And when he says meanness, he's talking about the nature of man and the meanness. They're mean. These are mean people. And a mean person cannot really keep the original intent and the purity that politics once had. They're mean. Me personally, when I see much of what has gone on, and I'm not just talking about the two candidates, but everything surrounding it. So many interviews I've seen, these are mean people. There's a lot of mean people saying mean things about each other. This is what he's citing. That right there is, because we're talking about politics today now, not so much people as politics, and how it's become perverted and everything else. I gave my own illustration here because this kind of makes sense for me to contextualize that politics are kind of like a car. Okay? Cars don't run over people. Cars don't determine where they're going. Cars do not determine the speed limit. Nothing like that, whether they're going to obey it or not. As we know, cars are in the hands of drivers, the person who's driving it, like a tool, like a weapon. A driver decides whether to obey laws, run over people, where they're going, whatever. And politics is like that. It's a vehicle. It's just a means to an end. The problem are the drivers themselves that we call politicians. They're people. Because they're the ones that are driving this vehicle. And the bigger problem is this, that the mode of transportation has changed. Like the horse and buggy, when we got rid of the horse and buggy and went to cars, there was a lot of people, when the cars were on the road, well, I'm driving my horse and buggy. Because that's what you do, you drive horses and buggies. And they couldn't transition to a car. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying the mode of transportation changed at the turn of the 20th century. It was an interesting time in American history. The mode of transportation is changing now. Politics itself is never going to go back to what it could have been and was originally. Because it's in the hands of politicians. And the worst part about the mode of transportation changing is that politicians insist on driving it.